Amidst a terrifying raid operation, the sound of sirens wailed, red and blue light spun, and shouts of command echoed in the air. Yet, just as the situation peaked, a young officer suddenly collapsed to the ground. His body slammed hard onto the dusty street. His breath stopped momentarily, his vision blurred. As he tried to get up, his eyes froze. The dark, black muzzle of a handgun was pressed straight against his face. And the one gripping it was not a criminal, but his own teammate. A dark secret was unveiled from behind that gun barrel. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to join us on this mysterious case as it traces the truth. A roaring sound shattered the silence of the New Orleans night, which was being washed by a light drizzle. Red and blue lights from the police vehicles shone brightly, dancing on the puddles in the narrow streets of the Kenner area. The overcast sky hung low, as if witnessing this unusual night. People ran in all directions. Street vendors abandoned their carts just like that. Doors were shut tight. Children were dragged inside by their mothers. "Go inside. Don't look," shouted an elderly mother to her grandchild, pulling a half-hanging bamboo blind. Amidst the chaos, Sarah Miller, a member of the Eastern Hawks unit, ran with her team, navigating the narrow, slippery, and muddy alley. Her breath was heavy, her eyes sharp, monitoring every dark corner. Her ears were filled with the sound of shouts, footsteps, and her own pounding heart. But suddenly, she stumbled, her foot slipping on a patch of mud. Her body was thrown to the cold, slick ground. Dust mixed with mud stained her light brown uniform. She tried to get up, but her muscles tightened. The world seemed to slow down. As she lifted her face, her eyes froze, just 3 feet in front of her. A rifle barrel was pointed right at her forehead. Her breath caught. But what truly stopped her heart was not the weapon. It was the one holding it. It was James Peterson, the man who had once taught her to shoot. The man who had saved her life 2 years ago. The man whom she had secretly perhaps trusted more than anyone else on the team. Their eyes met in silence. The rain fell harder. But the sounds of the world seemed to disappear. Her colleagues around them froze. Not one of them moved. No one dared to approach. All watched in silence. Sarah wanted to speak, but her tongue was tied. Her hands pressed against the ground, trying to rise. Her knees trembled. Blood ran from her wounded elbow. But her eyes did not turn away. She stared intently at James. "James," she whispered. But the man did not answer. His right hand gripped the rifle, stiff, almost like a statue. His eyes were red, as if holding a storm that could explode at any moment. Sarah didn't understand why. Why him? Why tonight was he the opponent? Behind James's head, Sarah saw the silhouettes of other armed men. Strange faces, not wearing uniforms, the guards of the Black Dragon Syndicate. Then it was true what Chief Thomas had told her 3 days ago. Sometimes, the traitor doesn't come from outside, but from the person we trust the most. Now, that sentence echoed clearly, like thunder striking Sarah's chest. The atmosphere grew tenser. James still hadn't lowered his weapon. The tip of the barrel didn't move. Meanwhile, the sound of a helicopter began to be heard in the distance. Thump, 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 it pounded the night sky, bringing backup, or perhaps regret that was already too late. Sarah drew a deep, painful breath, but her gaze remained firm. She knew tonight wasn't just about catching a fugitive. It was a night where trust was tested, and the deepest wound didn't come from a bullet, but from betrayal. The seconds felt so long. James was still standing, the rifle aimed at Sarah. The gun barrel felt like an invisible line separating two worlds, the world of truth and the world torn apart by dark shadows. Sarah held her breath. Her mind raced. What happened? Why James? It can't be. He's an honest person. He's not like this. It can't be. But those eyes didn't lie. James's eyes, the eyes that once shone with courage and dedication, were now dull, burdened by an unspoken weight. His hand trembled slightly, though the rifle was still firmly aimed. It wasn't the hand of a killer. It was the hand of a man trapped between loyalty and threat. From the other side of the alley, the sound of heavy footsteps began to approach. Other officers from the Eastern Hawks unit still didn't dare to come closer. Some tried to speak over the radio, but not a single word came out of their mouths. All eyes were now focused on the two figures, Sarah and James, two colleagues, two friends, two people now on opposite sides. Sarah gritted her teeth. Slowly, she tried to stand, enduring the pain in her knee. The rain was still falling, soaking her hair and face. But she stood, fragile yet resolute. "James," she said softly, more firmly this time. "If you shoot me now, you're not just killing me, you're killing everything we ever fought for." James remained silent. His eyes narrowed, his breath heavy. The tip of his index finger now touched the trigger. One slight squeeze and everything would change forever. "Do you remember our time in Memphis? When we almost died in that cornfield because of the trap?" Sarah's voice was starting to get hoarse. "You said, 'Sarah, if I die, make sure I die on the right side.' Do you still believe that, James?" James bit his lower lip. Raindrops mixed with tears on his face. Something within him churned. Old memories flooded his mind. The time he and Sarah had to go undercover as a couple of farmers to investigate a trafficking ring in Jackson. The time he carried Sarah to safety from a mafia siege in the middle of the night. Everything rushed in. However, another face also appeared in his thoughts. His wife's face, his 5-year-old son's face, and the face of the brutal man from the Black Dragon who had said, "One wrong move, your family will be the first casualties." James closed his eyes for a moment. "Forgive me," he whispered inwardly. "I can't choose." Suddenly, Sarah's voice was heard again. This time, it was louder, sharper, and full of hurt. "So, this is your path, James? You choose silence, letting them win. Do you think your family will be safe if you comply? No. They will still take everything from you. You know that." James was shocked. Sarah's words were like a whip striking his chest hard. He opened his eyes. For a moment, he saw the shadow of his son smiling, holding a wooden toy he had carved himself from a piece of scrap wood. The sound of metal scraping was clearly audible. The tip of his finger now truly pressed the trigger. Click. Sarah closed her eyes. But the sound of a gunshot never came. What was heard instead was the thud of metal falling. James's rifle slid to the ground, his body following. His knees hit the ground first, and then he fell to a seated position. His hands covered his face. His body shook violently. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I didn't have a choice." Sarah opened her eyes. She gasped, seeing the figure she once respected now broken before her, like a small child who had just lost their way. The other officers immediately moved. Some approached, putting on handcuffs, even without resistance. One of them, Frank, looked at Sarah hesitantly. We have to report to Chief Thomas." Sarah just nodded slowly. Her mouth was dry, her heart ached. Her gaze never left James, who was now sitting on the ground, staring blankly ahead. Some other officers began to lead James away. But before he was completely pulled away, James turned one last time. "If you ever find out everything, please protect my son. His name is Arjun. He didn't do anything wrong." Sarah didn't answer. Only her tears answered everything. That night wasn't just a failed mission. That night wasn't just a bullet that wasn't fired. That night was the night when trust cracked, hope broke, and reality showed the darkest side of the person we once trusted with all our hearts. The New Orleans sky was still overcast the next morning, as if unwilling to let the light penetrate the gloom that enveloped Sarah's heart. She sat silently in the internal interrogation room of the Eastern Regional Police Headquarters. Before her, 2 officers from the Ethics Oversight Division were examining the report of the previous night's incident. "So, Officer Miller, are you sure that James Peterson acted under pressure from a criminal organization?" asked one of the officers, sipping his cooling coffee. Sarah only nodded slowly. "He never intended to kill me. He was just trapped." The other officer jotted something down in his small notebook. "But there is no visual recording. The camera on your body was damaged due to the fall. Without concrete evidence, we can't draw a one-sided conclusion." Sarah gripped her cold fingers. Outside the room, the sound of footsteps and ringing phones answered each other. The world kept moving, but her heart seemed to be stuck in that narrow alley from last night. After the interrogation session ended, Sarah walked out through the long corridor with its faded white walls. At the end of the hall, Chief Thomas stood with his arms crossed over his chest. His gaze was calm, yet sharp. "Come in," he said softly. In his office, filled with maps and files, Chief Thomas poured warm tea into a small mug. "Drink this, It's ginger tea from my wife. It might calm you down a bit. Sarah took it with a trembling hand. She sipped slowly, then put the mug down. Silence hung for a moment. You know, Chief Thomas said, looking at a large map of New Orleans on the wall, I've been suspicious for 2 years. But I didn't have any proof. James was too clever at hiding his tracks. But I didn't think he would go this far. Sarah bit her lip. He's not a bad person, Chief. He's just a desperate father. Chief Thomas turned, his eyes soft. That's exactly why you have to continue. Don't let what happened stop with James. Behind all this is a larger network. The Black Dragon Syndicate wasn't established yesterday. They've planted their people deep within the system. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll find out. Good, replied Chief Thomas. But you won't be alone. I'm forming a special investigative team, but you're leading it. And we'll start with James's meeting with a man named Robert Adkins. Sarah frowned. Who is he? A lawyer, Chief Thomas explained. But not just any lawyer. He's known to be close to high-ranking officials, uses a social foundation as a cover, and has access to correctional facilities. He is suspected of being the liaison between the Black Dragon and sleeper agents in government institutions. Sarah wrote the name down in her small notebook. This was bigger than she had imagined. Later that night, Sarah returned to her small apartment in the Bayou area. Dim lights, humid air, and the sound of dripping water from the kitchen were the only fillers of the silence. She opened her laptop, turning on the voice recording from her body radio from last night. Most of it was damaged, but there was one part that was faintly audible. If you ever find out everything, please protect my son. Sarah held her breath, her hand trembling as she played the section back several times. The face of Arjun, James's son, was envisioned in her mind. The child knew nothing, but his life might also be in danger now. At 2 a.m., Sarah sat on the floor, her back against the wall. In her hand was an old photo of her and James with the team during an assignment in Mobile. The smiles on their faces were so sincere, so real. Who would have thought everything would collapse? She cried silently. Not because of fear, but because of a wound that couldn't be reported upstairs. A wound that couldn't be stitched with bandages or treated with hospital medicine. This wound remained in her heart. But behind those tears, a determination began to grow again. She wouldn't let this end just like that. James might have given up, but she would not. The next morning was covered in a thin fog. The streets were wet after the night's rain. The smell of damp earth mixed with the exhaust of vehicles slowly creeping towards the city center. Sarah stood in front of a grand white building in the Garden District. The building was inscribed with the words, Law Officers of the Robert Adkins Foundation. She took a deep breath, tucked her hair into a plain black headscarf, and stepped inside. Her appearance was disguised, no longer a police uniform, but simple clothing like a private sector employee. Today's task was not to arrest, but to observe. Inside, the atmosphere was calm. The lobby was filled with landscape paintings, and in the corner stood a statue of a bald eagle made of teak wood. A young receptionist greeted her kindly. Good morning. How can I help you? Sarah offered a faint smile. I have an appointment to see Mr. Adkins for a legal consultation. The receptionist checked the list, then nodded. Please wait a moment. Sarah sat on the plush chair. Her eyes scanned the surroundings. On the wall hung photos of Robert Adkins shaking hands with a number of important officials, the mayor, a congressman, even a general. His face looked clean, his smile charming, his clothes always neat. There was no sign whatsoever that this man was involved in a criminal network. However, Sarah's intuition said otherwise. And James had mentioned his name before being captured. A few minutes later, a large wooden door opened. A man about 45 years old walked out, wearing a grey suit. His hair was neatly combed, his glasses thin. That was Robert Adkins. Please come in, he said warmly. His voice was deep and reassuring. Sarah stepped into his office. The room was spacious, with tall bookshelves and a faint aroma of cinnamon. Neatly stacked legal files covered the desk. But in the corner of the room, something caught Sarah's attention. A map of Louisiana with several red dots marked. Those dots were exactly in the high-risk areas currently being investigated by the police for Black Dragon activity. Sarah restrained herself from staring too long. She sat down, adapting to her role. A formal conversation began, as if she truly had come for a consultation. However, every word Robert spoke was filled with suspicious calmness. His eyes were sharp, as if seeing through Sarah's thoughts. What field are you working in? Robert asked, pouring tea. I'm in the private sector, in logistics, Sarah replied flatly. Oh, logistics, he said. An interesting world. Many doors can be opened through logistics, he said with a small smile. But also many doors that are better left closed. That sentence made Sarah's hair stand on end, as if Robert knew who she really was. After the brief meeting ended, Sarah left with her heart pounding. She knew Robert was no ordinary person. His every movement was controlled. Every word contained a double meaning. And worse still, he might already have smelled out Sarah's disguise. That night at the Eastern Hawks unit headquarters, Sarah reported her findings to Chief Thomas. Chief, I'm sure Robert Adkins is the main liaison. He's not hiding his tracks well. The map in his office clearly showed their distribution routes. Chief Thomas listened with a serious face. Yes, but the problem isn't that we are blind. The problem is there are too many people above us who are closing their eyes. You mean some of the names in the photos you saw with Robert are our superiors too, Sarah? We have to be careful. This is no longer just a criminal case. It's entered the political realm. Sarah fell silent. Those words struck her hard. She began to realize how big the opponent she was facing was. Not just street mafia, but powerful officials. Chief Thomas approached, placing his hand on Sarah's shoulder. I know this is tough, but you have to continue. James has fallen. Don't let his sacrifice be in vain. A few days later, Sarah began secretly following Robert's trail. She saw the man frequently entering and exiting luxury hotels in the downtown area, meeting with men in black suits. On one occasion, she managed to record a meeting between Robert and a port official. From the brief conversation, Sarah heard the key phrases, container 3 nights from now through Baton Rouge Port, Dragon Code. Sarah quickly noted it down. That meant a large shipment was coming in. Maybe narcotics, maybe weapons, or even people. Whatever it was, this was golden evidence. But before she could report it, someone tapped her shoulder from behind. Sarah instinctively reached for the pistol in her bag, but a familiar voice stopped her movement. Relax, Sarah, it's just me, Frank. Sarah looked at her teammate, slightly relieved. Why are you here? Frank looked around, then leaned closer. I shouldn't be telling you this, but be careful. There are whispers that someone inside the team is reporting your movements to outside parties. What do you mean? It means your disguise is weak, and I'm not sure all members of the Eastern Hawks unit can be trusted. Sarah froze, her heart growing heavier. James was proven to be a traitor because of pressure. But what if there were more Jameses around her? That night, Sarah sat alone in her room. The sound of the evening prayer call was heard from the distance, breaking the silence. She opened her notebook, writing simple words. If I stop now, justice dies. If I continue, maybe I'll die. But if I just stay silent, who will protect children like Arjun? A tear fell onto the page. She closed the book slowly, and in her heart, she knew the road back was closed. That night, the sky was pitch black. The sea wind blew strong, bringing a salty aroma mixed with the smell of diesel from the cargo ships lined up at the dock. The port searchlights cut through the thin fog. But many corners remained hidden in the shadows. Sarah stood behind a giant blue container. Her body crouched low. Her breathing was steady, but her heart was pounding fast. Her watch showed 11:30 p.m. According to the information she had heard from Robert Adkins's meeting, the Dragon Code container was supposed to arrive tonight. She pressed a small button on the communication device attached to her ear. Eastern Hawks Unit. Position, she whispered. Frank's voice answered from a distance. I'm on the north side near the empty warehouse. Situation is secure. Another voice followed from a team member named Dean. I'm at the main entrance. Normal traffic, but nothing suspicious. Sarah nodded slowly, but somehow, her heart remained uneasy. Since Frank warned her that there was an insider leaking her movements, she could no longer fully trust every report. From behind the shadows, Sarah watched a large cargo ship slowly docking. Small lights on the deck illuminated a row of containers. The sound of steel chains and cranes creaked loudly. When the containers began to be lowered, several men in black suits waited on the dock. From a distance, Sarah could recognize one of them, a cold face with hair neatly slicked back. That was Robert Atkins's direct subordinate. They spoke briefly, then gave a signal to the container truck driver. A red container was carefully lowered, placed on the truck, and then tightly sealed. Sarah sharpened her gaze. That's the Dragon code. Sarah pressed her communication device again. Target visible. Red container. Serial number 9037. Don't move until I give the signal. But just as she finished speaking, the sound of a gunshot echoed from the north. Bang! Sarah flinched. That was the direction of Frank's position. Frank, report, she called out. There was no answer. Only a loud noise, shouts, and running footsteps. Dean, what's happening? Sarah asked. Dean's voice sounded panicked. Sudden attack. They know we are here. Sarah cursed inwardly. So it was true that someone had leaked their plan. She immediately moved, running along the side of the dock. Her feet splashed in the standing saltwater. Her body slipped between the containers. From a distance, she saw Frank lying on the ground. His shoulder was bleeding, while several armed men approached. Without thinking twice, she pulled the Glock pistol from her waistband. Bang, bang, bang. The shots were accurate, causing the armed men to fall. She ducked, pulling Frank's body to a safer spot. Hang in there, Frank, she urged. Frank winced in pain. They knew all our moves. Sarah, be careful. Stay quiet, don't talk too much. Sarah pressed Frank's wound with a piece of torn cloth from her shirt. Blood was still gushing, but she couldn't give up now. Suddenly, the sound of a truck engine roared loudly. The red container was being driven out of the port. Sarah turned quickly. No. They're escaping. She ran, leaving Frank behind the protection of a container. Each step was heavy, but her determination was heavier. She couldn't let the biggest evidence disappear. The truck sped towards the port gate. Dean tried to block it with the team's car, but another black SUV cut him off and hit him. A loud crash was heard, glass shattered, and Dean's car flipped onto its side. Sarah ran faster, her breath catching. She jumped onto a small parked truck, then fired her pistol at the container truck's tires. Bang, bang, bang. One tire burst, the truck swerved, nearly hitting the dock's iron fence. But the driver kept forcing it to move. Sarah gritted her teeth. She knew she couldn't chase the truck alone, but she managed to leave a clear mark on the container with her bullet. That will be a clue later. As she jumped down, the sound of footsteps surrounded her. From various directions, men in black appeared, carrying knives and firearms. They weren't just ordinary port mafia. This was the Black Dragon's army. Sarah slowly backed away. Her pistol was aimed forward. If you want to catch me, go ahead and try. But don't forget, I'm saving this last bullet for your brains. They looked at each other. Then one of them stepped forward, smiling cynically. We weren't ordered to kill you, officer. The boss just wants you to stop interfering. You're too brave. Sarah held her breath. On the man's face, she saw a small black dragon symbol on his neck. That was the mark of a loyal follower of the syndicate. The tension broke. They charged. Sarah fought with all her might, punches, kicks, quick shots. She managed to incapacitate 2 men, but there were too many of them. Just as she was cornered, the sound of sirens suddenly wailed from the direction of the port gate. Red and blue lights blinded their eyes. Police patrol cars arrived at high speed. A loudspeaker voice was heard. Police, drop your weapons. The Black Dragon men immediately retreated, disappearing into the darkness of the dock. In a matter of seconds, they vanished, leaving behind traces of blood and bullets. Sarah sat down, her body trembling, her breath ragged. She looked around. Frank was still seriously wounded. Dean was unconscious inside the overturned car, and the red container truck had disappeared somewhere. But in her heart, Sarah knew one thing. They almost finished her tonight. And the traitor inside the team must still be free, watching her every move. Rain fell again in New Orleans that night. Its drops danced on the window glass of her small apartment. She sat at the cramped dining table. Her laptop was open, displaying a map of Baton Rouge Port with a red circle at the last point where the red container was seen. Beside her, a glass of cold black coffee was almost untouched. Her eyes were tired, but her mind kept spinning. She wrote a new note in her small notebook. Red container, 9037R. Key evidence, my bullet marked its wall. Must be found. Frank is wounded. Dean is unconscious. The trader is still free. Next target, track the Shadow Logistics Network. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door startled her. She quickly grabbed the pistol next to her laptop, aiming it at the door. "Who is it?" she asked in a low voice. "It's me, Frank." The voice was faint, lost in the rain. Sarah rushed to open the door. Standing outside was Frank. His face was pale, his left arm still bandaged. "You should be in the hospital," Sarah said firmly. Frank smiled faintly. "If I stay there, I'm not sure I'll wake up again. Too many eyes are watching." Sarah was silent. That sentence was enough to explain. The hospital wasn't a safe place if the Black Dragon Network had truly infiltrated government institutions. They sat down together. Frank took a long breath. "Sarah, I have to be honest. I heard something when they attacked me at the port. One of them mentioned the name Commissioner Williams." Sarah frowned. That name wasn't unfamiliar. Williams was their direct superior, the man who always seemed calm, often gave speeches about integrity in front of the team. "No way," whispered Sarah. "I don't want to believe it either," Frank said. "But they mentioned his name with respect. Commissioner Williams's orders," they said. The room suddenly felt cold. Sarah stared blankly at the wall. If Williams was truly involved, it meant the betrayal wasn't just from James. It meant the syndicate had planted roots deep within the police force. The next day, Sarah was summoned to headquarters for an emergency meeting. The meeting room was filled with mid- and high-ranking officers. Commissioner Williams sat in the main chair. His face was serious, his hand tapping the table. "Colleagues, the mission at Baton Rouge Port ended in chaos. There was an information leak. I want a full report on my desk this afternoon," he said firmly. Sarah looked down, trying to hide her sharp gaze. William spoke as if he were the cleanest, most decisive person, yet his name had been mentioned among the Port Mafia. After the meeting ended, Sarah walked out with a few colleagues. Chief Thomas patted her shoulder gently. "You have to be careful. Williams has eyes everywhere. Don't show your suspicion. If he knows you're onto him, you're finished." Sarah nodded. "I'll be silent, but I won't stop searching." That night, Sarah dared to sneak into the internal archives room, using a borrowed access card from an old staff member she could still trust. She opened the drawer for internal oversight files. Her eyes quickly scanned for the name Williams, and there she found it, an old intelligence report from 5 years ago, stating he was suspected of receiving gratuities from Robert Atkins's foundation. But in the corner of the file was a big red stamp, closed, insufficient evidence. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. So it's true. Everything was known a long time ago, but covered up. There are hands protecting him. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps was heard from the corridor. Sarah quickly returned the file, turned off the light, and hid behind the archive cabinet. The door creaked open. Through a small gap, she saw the figure of Commissioner Williams himself entering. He spoke into his phone in a low voice. "Yes, the container is secure. It will be moved via the land route tomorrow night. Make sure no one interferes. If Sarah Miller tries to interfere again, silence her. Forever." Sarah's heart nearly jumped out. Those words were clearly aimed at her. After Williams left, she remained hidden for a few minutes, making sure the corridor was empty. Only then did she step out, her body trembling. That night, Sarah returned home with mixed feelings, anger, fear, but also more certainty that her fight was not over. In her apartment, she wrote in her small notebook, "James was just the surface. Williams is the core. Robert Atkins is the liaison. The container is still on the land route. I can't trust anyone but myself. And maybe Chief Thomas." She closed the book hard, and in the silence, she whispered to herself, "If justice doesn't come from within, then I will seek it from without." The rain stopped toward dawn. The New Orleans-Baton Rouge interstate was wet, glistening under the sporadic streetlights. Sarah sat in the passenger seat of an old car driven by Frank. Her face was tense, her eyes focused on the logistics distribution route map spread on her lap. That red container didn't go back into the port, Frank said, turning the steering wheel. According to my small informant, they took it via the land route toward Shreveport. From there, most likely to Ruston, the perfect place to hide something. Mountains, luxury villas, and small roads that are easy to guard. Sarah nodded. Ruston, a tourist town full of visitors. No one would suspect if dozens of logistics trucks enter every day. Their car sped further away from New Orleans. The city lights slowly faded, replaced by wet rice fields and morning fog. Sarah opened the window slightly, breathing in the damp air, but her heart remained heavy. She knew this journey was dangerous. If Williams had issued an order to eliminate her, then every police post, every civilian eye, could be an enemy. At a quiet rest area near Lafayette, they stopped. Frank got out to buy a can of coffee. Meanwhile, Sarah checked her notes. The serial number of the red container she had marked with her bullet that night, 9037R. She wrote it large on the front page of her small notebook. Suddenly, the sound of a large motorcycle stopped near the car. Two men in leather jackets got off. Their faces were covered by helmets. One of them walked directly towards Frank. "Frank, look out!" Sarah shouted from inside the car. Before Frank could react, the man drew a knife. By reflex, Sarah leaped out. Her pistol was aimed. Bang! One shot exploded. The knife fell. The man stumbled. The other one pulled out a pistol, returning fire. Frank took cover behind the car engine. Sarah crouched, then returned fire. Bang! Bang! The sound of bullets ricocheting off the wet asphalt. One of the bullets punctured the car tire, causing the car to tilt slightly. Finally, after a brief shootout, the two men fled on their motorcycle. Sarah ran after them for a few steps, but the sound of the motorcycle exhaust was already fading onto the interstate. Frank was breathless. They weren't ordinary road robbers. That was Williams's crew. Sarah nodded, her face cold. That means we are on the right track. They wouldn't bother sending people if we weren't close to something important. They continued their journey toward Ruston. The road began to wind through pine forests and the cool mountain air. From a distance, villas were lined up. Some looked empty, some had lights on, even though it wasn't very late yet. The informant said the container wasn't being unloaded in a regular warehouse, Frank said. They're keeping it in one of Robert Atkins's Foundation's villas. The villa is always quiet, but there are armed guards. Sarah sighed. If that's true, then what's inside that container is more valuable than just drugs. Frank turned. What do you suspect is inside? Sarah stared at the road ahead. I don't know, but I think it's people, not goods. Frank fell silent. Those words felt heavy. If the container truly contained people, perhaps trafficking victims, perhaps witnesses that needed to be hidden, then this syndicate was far more brutal than imagined. It was approaching midnight when they arrived at the outskirts of Ruston. They parked the car on a dirt road, then walked along a foot trail. From behind the trees, they could see a large white villa on the hillside. Several men in black suits were guarding outside, with automatic weapons slung over their shoulders. Security like a military base, whispered Frank. Sarah ducked down, observing. That's just the outside. What matters is what they're hiding inside. They waited until midnight, when the guards began to change shifts. In silence, they crept closer, bypassing a barbed wire fence and bushes. Sarah crawled on the damp ground, pistol in hand. Her heart raced quickly. Just as they were about to reach the backside of the villa, the sound of a heavy diesel engine was heard. A truck without a logo emerged from the villa garage, heading toward a small road behind the hill. Sarah watched intently, and there she saw it. The red container with serial number 9037R. Her chest swelled. That's it. But before she could move, a click was heard behind their heads. Someone had already aimed a weapon. Don't move, a deep voice boomed. Sarah and Frank slowly turned. 4 heavily armed men stood behind them. One of them turned on a radio, speaking quickly. Target found. Wait for further orders. Sarah gritted her teeth. She and Frank had been caught red-handed. A few minutes later, they were led inside the villa. Their hands were roughly tied. Their eyes were covered with black cloth. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor. The aroma of agarwood filled the room. When the blindfolds were removed, Sarah found herself standing before Robert Atkins. The man sat in a leather chair. His smile was cold. "Ah, Sarah Miller," he said softly, as if greeting an old guest. "Finally, we meet without the disguise." Sarah stared at him sharply. "What's in that container?" Robert chuckled faintly. "You really want to know? Fine, the contents are the future. A future that will change who is in power in this country." Sarah restrained her anger. The words were too vague, but enough to assure her that this case was much bigger than just local mafia. Robert stood up, walking closer. "But unfortunately, you won't get to see that future, because tonight your journey ends." He signaled with his hand. Two armed men stepped forward, pointing guns at Sarah and Frank's heads. But before the trigger was pulled, another voice echoed from the doorway. Firm, loud, and full of authority. "Drop your weapons, Atkins. Your game is over." Sarah turned. In the doorway stood Chief Thomas with several fully armed team members. The searchlights illuminated his cold face. Robert just smiled. "Ah, Thomas, always showing up at the wrong time. But do you think it's easy to stop a dragon once it has risen?" The silence lasted only a few seconds. Then a loud sound broke the air. Bang, bang. The armed men in the room immediately returned fire. The small team brought by Chief Thomas fired their assault rifles. Sparks illuminated the grand villa walls. The crystal chandelier swung violently as bullets struck. Glass shards flew everywhere. Sarah immediately ducked, kicking a wooden chair toward one of the guards. Frank also dropped to the floor, trying to shield himself with an overturned long table. Robert Atkins slowly retreated to a side door. His face remained calm even though the room had turned into hell. "Hold them," he shouted. Chief Thomas shouted, "Sarah, Frank, head for the garage. Don't let that container leave the villa." Sarah moved instantly. She jumped over the body of a fallen guard, then ran down a long corridor. The white walls were now riddled with bullet holes. The smell of gunpowder was pungent, her ears ringing from the explosions. Behind her, Frank ran stumbling. Still in pain, but holding his pistol. They reached the large garage. The truck with the red container 9037 had its engine started. The headlights were bright, ready to speed out. The driver shouted frantically, "Quickly open the gate." Sarah aimed her pistol at the truck's tires. Bang, bang. The two front tires burst, causing the truck to swerve. The driver tried to flee, but Frank managed to shoot him in the leg. However, before they could approach, another group of men appeared from a side door, unleashing a barrage of bullets. Sarah took cover behind a steel pillar. Frank crouched beside a wooden crate. "There are too many of them," shouted Frank. "We can't retreat," Sarah replied. In the chaos, Sarah noticed something. The container door was slightly ajar. From the gap, the light from the garage lamp reflected onto something white. Her heart seized. Not a box, not a sack, but white cloth. Moving, like clothing. "Frank, that's not goods, that's people." Frank turned, his face pale. My God. They both fell silent for a moment, realizing Sarah's suspicion was right. The container was filled with people. Sarah braced herself. She ran toward the truck. Even as bullets flew, she kicked the container door wider open. And there, a sight that nearly broke her heart, dozens of people, mostly women and children, crowded inside. Their faces were pale, their eyes filled with fear. Some were crying, some were nearly fainting from lack of air. "Oh God," Sarah whispered. A small child grabbed her arm. "Please, we can't breathe." Anger burned in her blood. She turned toward the black dragon men who were still shooting, shouting in a hoarse voice. "You animals! This is what you were hiding." A bullet nearly hit her head, but Sarah ducked quickly, pulling the children out one by one. Frank fired at the opponents, providing as much cover as possible. At that moment, Chief Thomas and his team finally entered the garage. With quick coordination, they pressed the Robert Atkins's forces until they were cornered. "Secure the container," shouted Chief Thomas. Several team members immediately helped get the people out of the container, giving them water and emergency blankets. Cries filled the room. the cries of people who had been treated like merchandise. However, Robert Atkins had not lost. He reappeared on the upper floor of the garage, holding a long-barreled rifle. Calmly, he aimed at Sarah. "Stop playing hero, Sarah. Do you think you can stop a dragon with your bare hands?" Sarah looked at him with fury. "You've crossed a line. This is no longer about politics or money. This is about humanity." Robert smiled cynically. "Humanity won't feed your family. Power, yes, power is what moves the world. And I've bought enough people to ensure the dragon stays alive." His hand pressed the trigger. Bang! A bullet was fired. But it wasn't Sarah who fell. Chief Thomas stood in front. His body took the shot. He stumbled. Blood soaked his uniform. "Chief!" Sarah screamed, running to catch him. Chief Thomas looked at Sarah with weary eyes, his voice weak. "Don't stop. No matter what happens, don't let them win." His body weakened, but his hand still gripped Sarah's arm tightly before finally slumping. Sarah held back her tears. Anger burned through her body. She grabbed Chief Thomas's weapon, stood back up, and aimed at Robert Atkins on the upper floor. "This is for every child you locked up. And for everyone you destroyed." Bang! The bullet flew. Robert stumbled, his shoulder bleeding. He fell to the upper floor, then fled through a back corridor, limping. Sarah wanted to chase him, but Frank held her arm. "Sarah, we have to save these people first. We can chase Atkins later. Otherwise, all this will be in vain." Sarah was silent, then nodded. She knew Frank was right. Their priority now was saving lives. That night, the Ruston Villa became a silent witness. Blood mixed with rainwater on the marble floor. Screams turned into cries of relief. But for Sarah, this was only the beginning. She looked at Chief Thomas's body lying covered with an emergency white cloth. Her tears fell, but her heart made a promise. Robert Atkins, Williams, the Black Dragon, one by one, they would fall. And this time, she wouldn't stop until the dragon was truly buried. Light rain fell, wetting the Ruston streets. The streetlights were dim, fog covered the view. And in the distance, the faint sound of an ambulance was heard, carrying the survivors from the villa to the hospital. But one figure was still free, Robert Atkins. Sarah stood outside the villa. Her body was tired. Her face was still covered in dust and dry blood. Her eyes were red. Not just from exhaustion, but also from the loss of Chief Thomas. She felt as if a part of her heart had collapsed along with the fall of the man who had been a father figure to her. Frank approached, his shoulder crudely bandaged. "Sarah, we have to chase him now. Otherwise, he'll disappear again into his political shadows." Sarah nodded. She tightly held the pistol at her waist, then looked at the winding road toward the city. The tire tracks leaving the villa were still clear, mixed with wet mud. "He hasn't gone far. Let's follow him now." Their old car sped up again, driving down the winding roads. The wipers worked hard to clear the glass from the drizzle. Sarah's eyes were glued to the faint taillights in the distance. "He's heading to Shreveport," Frank said, looking at the small GPS on the dashboard. "From there, he can go to a small airport or hide in his foundation's large houses." Sarah clenched her fist. Whatever his plan, he must not escape tonight. But as they got closer, the road became emptier. Until suddenly, a small explosion was heard from under the car. Crash! The car swerved. The front tire went flat. "Our tire hit a spike strip," shouted Frank, stopping the car on the roadside. Sarah quickly got out to check. True, there are small steel spikes scattered. This is not an accident. Atkins prepared a trap. From a distance, the lights of a black car were seen speeding toward them. Not a civilian car, an SUV with tinted windows. Sarah quickly pulled Frank. "Run to the woods, quick." They both left the car, running along the slippery dirt road at the edge of the pine forest. The black SUV stopped near their car. Several men got out with weapons, tracing their tracks with bright flashlights. "Find them. Don't let them escape," the voice of one of the men echoed. Sarah and Frank held their breath behind a large tree. Their hearts pounded, their bodies trembling from the cold and tension. "Frank," Sarah whispered. "If I'm caught, don't worry about me. Keep chasing Atkins." Frank shook his head firmly. Don't talk like that. We are getting out of here together. The sound of footsteps grew closer. Flashlight beams swept the area. Sarah gripped her pistol tightly. Suddenly, a gunshot was heard. Bang! One man fell, his flashlight dropping. From the opposite direction, several police cars approached. Their sirens wailed. Frank flinched. That's backup. Sarah frowned. Or another trap. The police cars stopped. Several uniformed officers got out. But strangely, they didn't immediately aim their weapons at the Black Dragon men. Instead, they aimed at the woods where Sarah and Frank were hiding. Sarah was stunned. My God, they've been taken over too. Frank swallowed hard, his face pale. So, who can we really trust anymore? Sarah took a deep breath, then whispered. We can no longer rely on the institution. From now on, we only have ourselves. She reignited her resolve. Robert Atkins might have hands everywhere, but tonight he was wounded. His tracks could surely be followed. Sarah stared into the darkness of the road toward Shreveport, whispering to herself. The fight has just begun. It was almost morning when the small rental car driven by Sarah and Frank entered the city of Shreveport. The streets were starting to get busy with produce vendors and motorized rickshaws. But amid the crowds, Sarah kept sharpening her gaze, looking for the tracks of the black car they had been chasing since Ruston. According to a local informant, Robert has a secret villa in the South Highlands area, Frank said. It's not registered under his name, but everyone knows it's his. Sarah nodded, her eyes heavy, but her mind still alert. He must be going there. He's wounded, he needs a safe place. And that villa is quite far from the city centre, safe for hiding. About an hour later, they arrived in the South Highlands Hill area. The winding road was lined with old trees. The cold air bit. From a distance, a large colonial-style house stood grandly behind a high iron fence. The yard lights were dimly lit, but there was activity inside. Sarah stopped the car, turned off the lights, then observed with a small pair of binoculars. From behind the large glass window, she could see the silhouettes of several people. One of them was clearly Robert Atkins. His shoulder was bandaged. He's there, whispered Sarah. Frank observed. But he's not alone. Look, there's another guest. A diplomatic plated car in the yard. That's no ordinary guest. Sarah's heart pounded. If the guest was indeed a high-ranking official, then the Black Dragon's connections were wider than she had imagined. They waited for a while until two people emerged from the villa. One was a foreign man in a dark suit, tall, with blonde hair. The other was a local man, but his face was clearly visible, Commissioner Williams. Frank almost spoke, but Sarah quickly covered his mouth. Her eyes widened, her heart felt frozen. So it's true. Williams was not just a rumor. He was truly present at the heart of this meeting. Williams spoke briefly with the foreign man, then went back inside the villa. Frank whispered, if he's here, it means the police force is truly contaminated. Sarah lowered her head, restraining her anger. That means our enemy isn't just the syndicate. This is a state-level issue. They both slowly retreated into the small forest next to the villa. Sarah quickly wrote in her notebook. Robert Atkins, local liaison. Williams, police protector. Foreign man, likely international sponsor. If they are truly selling people to an international network, Sarah's voice trembled, then what we are facing is far bigger than Chief Thomas ever imagined. Frank looked at her. So, what's our next step? Sarah took a deep breath. We need strong evidence, video, recordings, anything. Otherwise, all this will just be an empty story. And tomorrow I could be found dead on the street, labeled an accident. They decided to wait until dawn. From behind the woods, they saw several cars entering and leaving the villa. Around 5 a.m., a black SUV sped out. From a distance, Sarah could see Robert's pale face inside. He's leaving, Frank said. To the small airport, Sarah guessed. He's going to escape before we can gather evidence. Without delay, they returned to their rental car, following from a distance. The empty Shreveport streets made the chase even tenser. Every turn could be a trap. Every brake light of the SUV could mean the end of everything. But in her heart, Sarah knew that tonight she had seen something that changed everything. Robert was not the peak of the pyramid. He was just a pawn. The real puppeteer was still hiding in the shadows, and that shadow was getting closer. That morning, the Shreveport sky was grey. The sun was covered by thick clouds. The cold mountain air was still felt. When the black SUV carrying Robert Atkins sped toward a small airport on the outskirts of the city. The airport was not busy, mostly used for private flights and cargo. Sarah and Frank followed from a distance in their noisy rental car. Every time the SUV turned, Sarah held her breath. "If they realize we are chasing them, we are finished," she muttered. Frank only nodded. His face was pale because the wound on his shoulder hadn't fully healed, but his spirit remained ignited. "We have to finish this today. If Atkins manages to escape, all the victims in that container will be for nothing." The black SUV finally entered the airport area. Sarah stopped their car in the distance, then quickly got out. From behind the barbed wire fence, she could clearly see a white private jet being prepared on the runway. Several armed men were guarding it tightly. Robert Atkins got out of the SUV, assisted by 2 of his bodyguards. His shoulder was still bleeding, but he still smiled faintly. The foreign man who was seen with Williams last night greeted him with a brief handshake. Sarah felt her blood boil. He's going to escape now. Frank looked at the barbed wire fence. "We can't just walk in. That's suicide." Sarah sighed deeply. She knew the risks well. But in her heart, Chief Thomas's words echoed, "Don't stop, don't let them win." "If we don't stop him now, we might never have another chance," Sarah said firmly. They walked along the fence, looking for an opening. Finally, they found a loose section, possibly from old repairs. Quickly, they crawled in, moving closer to the hangar. However, they hadn't gone far when a loud sound echoed. Click. A red laser beam shone on Sarah's chest. From the control tower, a sniper had aimed at her. "Down!" Frank shouted, pulling Sarah to the ground. A bullet flew, hitting the ground just a few inches from her head. The airport alarm sounded. Robert's bodyguards immediately reacted, looking for the source of the disturbance. Sarah and Frank ran with all their might, taking cover behind a cargo container. "Now they know we are here," Frank gasped. "Good," Sarah countered with a faint smile. "Then we'll make sure all eyes are on us, not on that jet." A shootout erupted. Sarah fired quickly, incapacitating 2 approaching guards. Frank provided cover fire, even though his hands were trembling from his wound. Bullets rained down on the container. Steel sparks flew everywhere. In the chaos, Robert kept moving toward the jet stairs. His face was pale, but his steps were firm. "Atkins!" she shouted. The man turned. His eyes were shocked to see Sarah still alive. His smile vanished. He tried to climb faster, but Sarah was already close. She raised her pistol, aiming at Robert's back. But before she could shoot, her body was struck by a bullet from the side. Bang! Sarah stumbled. Her shoulder was burning, blood gushing. She fell to her knees, nearly losing her weapon. From the side, a bodyguard approached, raising his weapon to shoot her again. "Sarah!" Frank screamed, then fired. The bodyguard fell. But Frank himself was hit by a bullet in the leg. He fell, grimacing in pain. Sarah forced herself to stand. Although her body was shaking, her eyes never left Robert's figure, who was already halfway up the jet stairs. With her last ounce of strength, she raised the pistol and shouted, "Stop or I'll shoot." Robert turned, his eyes full of hatred. "Do you think you can stop a dragon with just one bullet, Sarah? The dragon always has other heads." He laughed coldly, then stepped up. Sarah held her breath, her finger on the trigger. Bang! The bullet flew, hitting Robert's already wounded shoulder. He fell from the stairs, tumbling onto the runway. Blood soaked his expensive suit. The situation was chaotic. The private jet was immediately shut down. Bodyguards ran frantically, and local police sirens began to approach. Sarah ran toward Robert's body, which was groaning in pain. She pointed the pistol at his head. "It's over, Atkins. You're not escaping again." Robert looked at her with a bitter smile. Blood flowed from his mouth. "You think this is the end? I'm just a pawn. There is still a king behind this board, and is much closer to you than you think." Sarah froze. Those words pierced her heart deeper than the bullet in her shoulder. Before she could ask further, local police arrived, securing the area. Robert was carried away on a stretcher, still smiling mysteriously, despite being critically injured. Sarah stood silently on the runway. Blood was gushing from her shoulder. Her mind was spinning. If Robert was just a pawn, then who was the real king? In the afternoon after the airport siege, the atmosphere at Shreveport Hospital was bustling. Victims from the shootout were brought in, including Robert Atkins, who was now lying with a bandage on his chest. Although his body was weak, his lips still curved into a faint smile every time the police tried to interrogate him. Sarah stood outside the ICU room. Her shoulder was bandaged, her face pale, but her gaze remained hard. Frank sat in a chair, his leg bandaged, trying to calm himself. "He's still alive," Frank said. "But will he talk?" Sarah shook her head. "Not completely. He'll only give us pieces of the puzzle. That's their way of keeping us always one step behind." A few hours later, Sarah was granted permission to speak directly with Robert. She entered the room with tight security. Robert lay weak, but his eyes were still sharp. "Ah, Sarah Miller," he said softly, his voice weak. "You really are like a thorn that can't be removed." Sarah looked at him coldly. "You're done, Atkins. Everyone in the container is safe. You will die behind bars." Robert chuckled, even though every laugh made him cough blood. "You think bars can stop a dragon? You're greatly mistaken. There is someone more powerful than me, even more powerful than Williams. He is the one moving everything. I'm just an intermediary." Sarah leaned closer. "Who is he?" Robert slowly turned. His eyes flashed. "You already know him. Longer than you think." That night, Sarah returned to the small headquarters of the Eastern Hawks unit in Shreveport. She opened old files, closed reports, ignored notes. Frank sat beside her, helping her turn pages. Suddenly, Sarah found an old document, an intelligence report from 5 years ago. It was about a black business network in New Orleans involving a social foundation. The name that was listed as the main donor made her blood stop flowing for a moment. "Commissioner Williams," she whispered. Her face was pale looking at Frank. "So it's true. Williams is not just a protector, but the mastermind behind all this." Sarah closed the file with trembling hands. She remembered the night in the archive when she heard Williams talking on the phone. All the puzzle pieces now fit together. Robert was only a pawn. The Real King was Williams, their own superior. The man who was supposed to uphold the law. The next day, Sarah decided to confront Williams directly. She came to the Shreveport Police Department, where Williams was currently leading an emergency meeting. His room was large, full of operation maps, and at the end of the table, Williams sat with a calm face. When he saw Sarah enter, he smiled faintly. "Sarah, you really are a persistent soldier. Congratulations, you've brought down Atkins. But are you sure you've severed the dragon's head?" Sarah stared at him sharply. "I already know who the dragon really is." The room became silent. Several other officers turned in surprise at the tension between the two. Williams slowly stood up, walking closer. "Be careful with your words. An unsubstantiated accusation can kill your career, even your life." Sarah gripped the pistol at her waist, but she knew she couldn't just shoot him in the middle of a meeting room. She just whispered softly, enough for Williams to hear. "The evidence will come, and when the time comes, there will be no place dark enough for you to hide." Williams stared at her for a long time, then smiled coldly. "We'll see, Sarah Miller. We'll see who is faster, you bringing the evidence, or me erasing you." That night, Sarah stood on the balcony of a simple inn. Rain fell again, wetting the city of Shreveport. She looked far into the dark sky. Now the truth was clear. Robert was merely an intermediary. The Black Dragon was only the surface face. The Real King was Williams, and to bring him down, she had to be ready for a war far more dangerous than everything she had experienced. A few weeks after Robert Atkins's arrest, New Orleans looked back to normal. The streets were crowded, the markets full of haggling, children running in the narrow alleys. However, behind that normality, a storm was still raging. Sarah sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, looking out the window. Her shoulder had healed, although the bullet scar still felt sore when night came. In her hand was a small notebook, where she wrote down all the facts, names, and events she had gone through. The last page contained one name. Circled heavily, Commissioner Williams. Frank arrived, still limping with a wooden cane. He sat across the table, looking at Sarah. "You're still after him, aren't you?" Sarah smiled bitterly. "I don't have a choice. If I stop now, everyone who died will be in vain. James, Chief Thomas, even the children in that container. They deserve justice." Frank sighed. "But Williams is too powerful. He has people in politics, business, even within the police itself. If we attack him without evidence, we are the ones who will be destroyed." Sarah slowly closed her notebook. "Then I have to find another way. Evidence can be destroyed, witnesses can be silenced, but the truth cannot die. I will make it clear to everyone. Not in a closed courtroom, but in front of the people." A few days later, a large press conference was held in New Orleans. It was originally planned to announce the success of the operation against the Black Dragon Syndicate. Williams sat in the main chair, wearing a neat uniform, smiling widely for the cameras. But just as he began to speak, the side door opened. Sarah entered, carrying a thick folder containing documents, recordings, and victim testimonies. The whole room turned. "Excuse me, Commissioner," Sarah said loudly, "but there's a truth that hasn't been delivered here." Williams's face tensed, but he still smiled. "This is not the place." "On the contrary, this is the place," Sarah cut in. She placed the folder on the reporter's table. "All the evidence is here. The names of the officials protected by Robert Atkins's foundation, the flow of illicit funds, even your own voice recording ordering that I be silenced." The room suddenly erupted. Reporters scrambled to take photos, turning on their cameras. Williams tried to stay calm, but cold sweat began to dampen his forehead. Sarah stared him straight in the eye. "You are not a protector of the law. You are the biggest traitor in this uniform." That day became the turning point. Although the legal process was long and full of political resistance, the public outcry was too loud to be silenced. National media highlighted the case. The people were angry, and the pressure forced higher institutions to intervene. Williams was finally arrested. His face, once full of authority, was now displayed on television screens with the label suspect of corruption and human trafficking. A few months later, Sarah stood at Chief Thomas's grave. The evening wind blew gently, carrying the scent of magnolia flowers from the cemetery grounds. "Chief," she whispered, "it's all over. The dragon finally fell. But this wound will never truly heal." Her tears fell. But this time, there was a slight smile on her face. She knew the struggle didn't end just by toppling one man. But she also knew that every step she took had brought light to many people who were once buried in darkness. That night, on the balcony of her apartment, Sarah looked at the city of New Orleans, sparkling with streetlights. She opened her notebook one last time. On the last page, she wrote, "Justice may come late, but it is never lost. As long as there are people who dare to stand, the truth will always find a way." She closed the book, then looked up at the stars shyly appearing from behind the clouds. In her heart, she knew the journey was still long, but she was no longer alone. Because even though the wound was deep, the light was always at the end of it. Friends, if you've listened to the very last minutes, you must have felt a lot of emotions. Shock, anger, regret, even pity for the fate of this case. One life was lost, a crime that seemed perfect, nearly forgotten. However, thanks to the persistence of those who sought the truth, justice was finally upheld. What is your opinion on how the case was resolved in the story? Was it courage or recklessness? If you were the insider, what would you do? Please leave a comment below. If you believe the truth deserves to be revealed, press 1. If you feel there is something suspicious, press 0. Thank you for listening, and may you always stand on the side of justice, even if the path is not easy.